So yes, we're very excited about the all hands meeting. So yeah, please submit. And even if you are not,
could you just in this area?
where can I wander?
Yeah, there.
Here's
to your
okay?
right. To your right.
To my right.
I can follow it.
One side.
I'm right-handed, so I feel like I need to balance myself quite a lot. So it feels a little weird, but I'll put up with it. So we're very excited. Yeah, definitely sign up for the all hands, even if you're not particularly interested in giving a talk. We're also going to have a workshop. Emil back here is going to be co-teaching a workshop at the beginning with me on doing some cool stuff with ggplot, annotating it, using colors to highlight things. So, kind of taking your ggplot to the next level to make it really communicate what you want to try and say. But that's not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is this stuff, YAML. So, who uses R Markdown currently? Okay. And so, of those who use R Markdown, who has started a new R Markdown document, couldn't remember how they set up their YAML before, and just went to another one and copy and pasted it into, yeah, exactly. So that's what I call the YAML problem. I started wandering over there again. That's what I call the YAML problem, which is this fact that R Markdown is relatively easy to pick up, and YAML, which we use to really create our Markdown documents, is just, it smells different than R, it looks different, it behaves in ways that are considerably different, shows you errors differently, and so people really trip up on this when they're picking it up. Just out of curiosity, does anybody teach R Markdown here? Okay, probably won't cover that then. Since we had a little extra time, I was going to talk about, I just wrote a blog post about teaching YAML with this. So if you eventually get into that realm, talk to me. I'd be happy to talk about it. Very excited about it. So the other thing that I'm really excited about is R Markdown itself. R Markdown, I mean, it's amazing. If you're not using it, I really recommend checking it out. You can learn the basics of Markdown syntax in an afternoon and really do powerful things. You're going to save yourself just countless hours of work. I'm a scientist, and so I frequently will have a situation where I'm writing a document, I've got tables, I've got figures, I send it to my boss, and she's like, no, I don't want you to do it like that. I want you to look at it by this group or that group, or cut it up this way, or remove this thing. And so it used to be I had to copy and paste everything that I did before back into the document after I redid all my code and reworked all my data. And R Markdown is the thing that has saved me the most time in my data analysis life, for sure. And often that process feels quite a bit like magic. So this is by our friend up in the Santa Barbara R-Ladies group, Allison Horst, who, if you're on Twitter, you may have seen these things floating around. She makes these drawings of what she calls monsters with a capital R, monstars. And she draws all these different the elements of these different packages and other things going on in the R community. And I love this one because really R Markdown feels a lot like magic. And I like this little detail a lot because if you kind of peek into this cauldron here, where this magic is happening, there's a little thing floating in here. And that's YAML, which is this special ingredient that we're tossing into our magic cauldron, and it's making a lot of this stuff happen. So you may not know a lot about what's happening in the background of R Markdown as we're putting these documents together. But an interesting thing about R Markdown is that it's really the confluence of many powerful tools in the data analysis pipeline. So we usually write in R Markdown, and then we've got the knitter package or the knitter package, depending on your choice of pronunciation, which will then turn it into a Markdown document. So not an R Markdown document, but a regular Markdown document. And then we can pass that Markdown document to Pandoc, which is like the super secret sauce in R Markdown that makes all this stuff happen. And the Pandoc turns whatever we've got into all of these different document types. And YAML is one of the connecting factors of this confluence of tools that we use, right? So in R Markdown, we tell it what kind of output document we want to make, HTML documents, PDF documents, that sort of thing. We put our names in there. We've got things in Pandoc, like if you're working with PDFs, you can set specifications for the LaTeX, the system that it's actually using for typesetting to create the PDF documents. And you can create your own custom templates, which is actually what R Markdown does. It has some specialty templates that it lays on top of Pandoc. And you can send information using YAML to these templates. And so YAML is a really important part of this pipeline because it connects these tools together in a lot of ways. But even Niwei, who wrote R Markdown and a lot of these tools, is not crazy about this this way of specifying data about our documents. Here he says, I don't like YAML or Tama, which is another language that's similar to YAML. It's supposed to be a human-readable language. But I don't know a better alternative either. The world of config languages is a total mess. Right? So these languages that we use for configuration for our documents, anyway, doesn't like them. So this is the issue that we bump into. So briefly, YAML is used in a lot of settings. You may have seen it around if you're working in data science and production using a variety of in-production tools that use YAML to configure things. So it stands for yet another markup language, or depending on your source, it might also stand for the more recursive YAML ain't markup language, which is the one that I like the most. So usually we've got something like this at the top of our R Markdown document, right? I've got title, this is my annual report that I'm sending off. That's me, I'm the author. I'm using a little bit of R code to set my date for just whenever I'm knitting this document. And then I'm also saying I want to have a PDF document with a table of contents here, right? So YAML often works with using these key and value pairs, right? So the key is the title, title, author, date. These are keys, and then the value is the thing that comes after the semicolon or after the colon. Right, and so the other thing about YAML, the one that really trips people up, is that it's nested in such a way that white space is really important. Of course, there's some other programming languages that use white space like this, but R does not. And so if R is your primary language, this is often something that really confuses people. They will see something like this and they'll type it out themselves and it just won't work, and it's not clear to them why, right? But here we've got this key at the top level, which is output, and then underneath that we have PDF document, and underneath that we have TOC is true. Right? This is telling YAML that these three things are connected, right? This belongs to this, which belongs to this. So one thing that you may not know about these output functions, these output specifications, is that they actually refer to functions in the R Markdown package. So PDF document, HTML document, Word document, these are functions in R Markdown. And so you can look at the help page and find these arguments, right? So this is a very helpful trick. Even if you don't go and learn much about YAML, even if you kind of fall asleep for the rest of the talk, this is a wildly useful trick. If you want to know what you can do with your kind of like out-of-box R Markdown documents, this is a function, right? So it looks like this. And that means that you can go to the help page for PDF document, HTML document, Word document, and get a whole bunch of information about what you can specify, what the valid options are, which is something that's often very confusing for people, right? So the first thing that's confusing is that it doesn't smell like R, doesn't look like R. Often it doesn't tell you what's going wrong. And then the other thing is that it's not clear very often where the documentation for all this stuff is. Like, what can I do with this? It doesn't tell me when it doesn't run, because it just doesn't throw an error at all. So, kind of a spoiler alert, leaping ahead to this package that I'm going to talk about, ymlthis. It's got this function called draw YAML tree. And what this will do is it will take a bit of YAML. So this is the YAML that we had just now up on the screen. And it will actually draw the relationship between all the different parts of this. Right? So here, we've got these three top-level items, right? And they don't have anything nested, right? They've got a key and a value, and that's it. But output, PDF document, and TOC, these are all linked. And so it's going to show you how these things are connected. And so this can be a useful way of diagnosing what's going wrong, because YAML will often not tell you what's going wrong. And so if you think something that should be connected and and it's not, this will explicitly draw that hierarchy that's in place with your YAML. Which is really useful because YAML often, when I'm screwing around with YAML, it's a total pain because I just have to keep trying and trying and trying until it works. Like it will not throw me an error. It will not tell me what's wrong. It will just be like, oh yeah, you probably meant to do that, right? You're smart. You're fine. I just won't bother you about it. So this all led to my work this summer at our studio. I was the R Markdown intern. I was originally going to work on some refactoring stuff, but we kept talking about this issue. We kept coming back to this issue. And so I ended up spending my entire summer working on this package, ymlthis. So I guess the headlining feature of ymlthis is that it can write YAML for you. So you don't actually need to know all of these nitty-gritty things about the syntax of YAML. There are now R functions that you can use that will write it on your behalf. It will write it in the right way, and by and large, it will write it with the right arguments and that sort of thing. Although YAML is very, very flexible, and so that makes that difficult. Another aspect of ymlthis that I was trying to solve a big problem with is just getting all of the documentation for this stuff in the same place. So the benefit of having all of these YAML options as R functions is that R functions are very easy to document, and it's also very easy to find that documentation because you just do question mark whatever the function name is, right? So this documents just about every piece of relevant YAML in the R and R Markdown world. It does that currently, and that will not always be the case because it's always changing. But for the time being, I think it covers pretty much everything. And then an area that I'm not going to talk a ton about tonight, but that I'm really, really interested in, is improving R Markdown workflows. So one aspect of this is very relevant to your day-to-day work, which is just like creating a new R Markdown document, which is something that I do all the time. So it's got some tools for that that are really useful. There's also a whole area that I'm very interested in of programming with R Markdown documents. Has anybody ever used the Drake package? Just out of curiosity. Oh, you should find a talk on Drake. That'd be cool. Drake is cool. So it's a way of doing reproducible analyses in a very efficient manner because it kind of handles all your caching for you. And it works really, really well with our Markdown documents. And so I'm very interested in that area too. One thing that I would love for ymlthis to do more of, that it's a little bit hard, is to validate the YAML that you're putting in. Because YAML fails silently, often you just don't know. This makes it hard though because it fails silently because it's so flexible. It's a really, really flexible language. So we're working on this still. We're working on this. This is the area of the package that's still maturing the most. So the basic function for ymlthis is YAML, no A, for better or for worse. I made that decision early on, and I still don't know if it was the right one. I still sometimes type in library YAMLthis, but I put YAML instead of YML. So I don't know if that was the right choice or not, but it's the choice I made. So this looks a lot like ggplot, things like that. It's a constructor function that creates a YAML object. And by default, it's going to go snooping around your computer and try and figure out who you are. Right? So there's a few ways to set this that's in the documentation that you can check. But it'll snoop around and try and figure out who you are. So it knows that I'm Malcolm. And then by default, it will also do this handy thing where for date, it will put in some R code that's going to put in just whatever the date is, the date and time of when you needed it. So ymlthis uses the pipe syntax that's very popular in the typeverse so that I could group these pieces of YAML into relevant categories. So one particularly useful one is actually calling these R Markdown functions. So PDF document, HTML document, these things that I've been talking about. So I'm going to write it like an R function because it actually is an R function. That's what R Markdown is doing on the inside is it's taking that YAML, is reconstituting it as an R function, and it's calling it in an R environment. So here I have YAML output, and it's capturing PDF document, and it's got the TOC true. I also added HTML document, and it will then paste into your console, output into your console, the correct syntax for how you should be setting this up. So in my mind, this is getting the output set up is one of the trickier things for beginners with YAML. And thinking about them as R functions, I think, is an intuitive way to go about it. So I find this very useful because sometimes we have this weird syntax. For instance, if we want more than one document type, we have to do this weird thing where we nest it, and we nest this, then we go back a space. But then if we don't have any arguments to pass to HTML document, if we don't put anything here, that means null in YAML in the syntax, and so it gets confused. And so you have to put default, which means no arguments, and I don't know, it's kind of a weird thing. So it handles all that stuff for you. And then it handles a lot of the other kind of metadata detail that you want, right? So if UA and Hadley are working on a paper together, working on a report together, we've got YAML author, the category is R, reproducibility, of course, and then there's a whole set of LaTeX options. And if you haven't dove into the kinds of things that you can do in your PDF and R Markdown, look at the help page for this function because it's really long. You can do a lot of settings quite easily if you know what the argument is. The problem is that those arguments were buried in the pandoc documentation, which I have read 3 or 4 times this past summer so that you don't have to. It's not that bad, but it's a little dry. And that produces the correct syntax again, right? So we have this kind of goofy thing where we're trying to group together the author names with UA and Hadley. We have to use this weird dash thing. This is like the R equivalent of this is a nested list inside of a nested list where the inner list doesn't have a name. So it gets really convoluted really quickly to think about this in R terms, right? But this puts this in the right syntax for you. So this supports, of course, all of the output functions that you encounter, because what it actually does is capture those output functions. So any output function that you're using in R Markdown, this package will support turning it into YAML. There's also a lot of this top-level YAML that these packages, these R Markdown extension packages, will add a little bit more detail to, right? So has anybody used bookdown? Blogdown? Yeah? Is that what's being covered, I'm assuming, in the portfolio website?
Yeah.
Blogdown. Cool. Yeah, Blogdown's awesome. And when you get confused about YAML, it's okay, because it's in this package. So these packages often they will have extra YAML that controls different aspects of how your website's being put together, how your book is being put together. So all of this is supported in ymlthis. Some of these packages, so one of my favorites is Strayon, which is how I make all of my slides, including these slides. But that doesn't have any extra top-level YAML, so I didn't need to do anything there, which saved me some time. As I mentioned, the nice thing about setting it up like this, besides the fact that I like writing in R, is that these being R functions, all of the arguments, I can take the documentation that's scattered throughout the world and put it in one place, which was actually probably the hardest thing that I did on this entire project, was just raking together all of this documentation, putting it in the same place. So all of these functions that create YAML start with yml_. And so if you want to know a little bit more about what your available options are, even if you're not using the package to write YAML for you, you can check the documentation for that. And really, you don't even need to go as far as going to the help page if you don't want to use the package itself, because there is a vignette included here. It's called the YAML Field Guide, which is the best pun that I made all summer. And it has all of this documentation gathered up into one place. So all of the things that I mentioned, all of these R Markdown extension packages, all the R Markdown YAML, all of the pandoc documentation that's relevant to your R Markdown documents. All of the documentation, like for the first time ever, is in one place here. So this is one of the more useful things that I did with this project. So if you just want to want to do something weird with your PDF and you don't know what the term is, you can kind of do search and find it and on this web page and search through it. What's that? It's back? There we go. Okay. That was dramatic. So ymlthis you can use this package to, I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the workflow section. You can use this package to programmatically create R Markdown quite easily. There's also an add-in, a shiny add-in that comes with this package. If you install and go up into the add-ins tab in RStudio. And this has probably 80% of the things that you will need for R Markdown. And so it gives you the options of setting up the basic YAML here. So this is report by me. I'm using an HTML document, and I want to add a floating table of contents here, which is a nice feature of the HTML document output type for R Markdown. And then if I hit done here, it will create this YAML for me, put it in the right format, and then open a new R Markdown document with it already inserted. Right? So it's kind of the feature that really should have been there all along in RStudio. There are actually some attempts buried deeply into RStudio that don't work very well, surprisingly. But this is really nice because you can surf through most of these options really quickly and quickly create an R Markdown file without having to go, find the last one that you use and just copy and paste it. So as I mentioned, you can use these, use the output of these, right? So these YAML functions will write YAML for you. It prints pretty cleanly to the console, so you can just highlight, copy, paste, blah blah blah. But this is an R project, so I really went for it. And there are a whole set of functions for then working with this YAML in a variety of ways. So there's this function useYAML that will place the YAML onto your clipboard, which is mostly something that I'm using internally, but every once in a while it's useful programmatically. And then the really useful one is this function useRMarkdown, which can take any of these YAML objects and will do what that add-in is doing. It's actually what the add-in is doing on the inside. Is it's taking this YAML stuff and it is compiling it together into an R Markdown document. What's neat about this function, is that you can combine previous documents with new YAML and sort of create your own. There's a way that you can create R Markdown templates using packages, but it's a little bit convoluted, and you need to know a little bit about package development to do it. YAMLthis, if you go and read the vignettes, it will allow you to create your own R Markdown templates by storing them in your R profile. And so these functions by default use R Markdown and use YAML. You can set them up to say, well, I always like to use string on my slides, or I always like to use, there's a nice set of output functions in bookdown called all the same function names in R Markdown. So it's like Word document, HTML document, PDF document, but it all end in 2. And it's got all the extra features that come in bookdown, which are really cool. You can cross-reference figures and that kind of thing. So I like to use that for my reports. So I have in my R profile, which I have to delete on occasion when I'm demonstrating this stuff, to use that YAML by default. So I have this sort of ad hoc template for my YAML. And you can do that pretty easily using a combination of this package. So useYAML defaults will put together the code that you actually need to put into your R profile. And then this kind of runs off the screen here, but there is a package called ymlthis. Has anybody used ymlthis? Oh, I love ymlthis. It's tied with ggplot and purrr for me for my favorite package. It's the most useful for R developers if you're working on packages, but it's really useful for working with projects and a variety of other things. And then it's got this function called edit R profile. So who's used their R profile? Who's put something inside of it? Amelia? Okay, I was going to say, I would be shocked if you didn't have anything in your R profile. I used to have in my R profile, there are 2 packages. One is called Cowsay, and one is called Dad Joke. And Cowsay draws a picture in your console of like different animals and stuff. And Dad Joke will tell you a dad joke, right? There's an API that it goes to. It just tells you a terrible joke. And so I had it set up in my R profile that every time my R session started up, like a cow would tell me a terrible dad joke. And it was delightful. I removed it recently, and I'm tempted to bring it back. But so using your R profile can be really useful for this kind of thing, where it's like things that you're using interactively. You wouldn't want to put library tidyverse in your R profile, something that's not reproducible. But stuff like this can be really, really useful. And then goofy stuff like having to tell you dad jokes is really nice too. So then when you do this, you can use Markdown, use ymlthis, or use YAML and all these other use functions to use the default setup that you have. You know, if you want it reproduced the same way basically every time your company has a report style that it like, you can do that quite easily. I'm not going to talk about this because writing files is boring, but there's a whole set of functions for writing files. I should say it's boring to everybody else. It's very exciting to me. I'm very excited about this area of growth for this package for programming with YAML and working with R Markdown documents as programming objects and going forward from there. And actually, many people have taken this up already to have different services write their bookdown. They use ymlthis to create their bookdown YAMLs for them. That's really cool. So there's a website here, Pakistan website. There are several articles, an introduction to ymlthis, which is basically what I just covered, but it's got a lot more detail on some of those things I talked about. There's an article called YAML and Overview, which is a slightly more detailed introduction to, you agree that you don't quite get YAML, but you don't really want to introduce this particular package to your workflow. This overview is a description of YAML itself and how it relates to R Markdown. It tells you a little bit more about the syntax, why things go wrong, as they often do. And then my favorite pet project, the YAML field guide, that has pages of this stuff. It's still loading, actually. And then I also, if you go into the realm of teaching with R Markdown, I have a blog post on the RStudio Education website about using this package to help you teach this subject, because often this is a subject that students get really tripped up on. And so I'm still thinking a lot about that and best practices in teaching R Markdown and that sort of thing, because Markdown itself is, UA says you can learn it in 5 minutes. I don't quite buy that. But I think an afternoon or two is probably about good for most people. And I think that's about all I have. So nothing about Python, unfortunately. I don't have any filler space there. Any questions?
I have a bunch.
You have a bunch.
So is this going to be part of Tidyverse eventually?
It is part of RLib. So it is the same group that's doing this work at RStudio. They tend to work on 2 different sets of packages. Tidyverse, which is primarily focused on data analysis packages, and then RLib packages. So this is part of the RLib organization, as is ymlthis and a bunch of other tools, dev tools if you use that one. And so those are mostly for interactive use, programming use, and that sort of thing. So they're utilities packages. So it's a part of that organization rather than Tidyverse.
Is there a way, so it looks like you have to write your R code that will generate your YAML that you then cut and paste and it opens a new doc.
Yeah.
Is there a way to just get rid of YAML and just have your R code, or is it because of the way it's structured, you go YAML, markdown, blah, 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 that you can't possibly do that?
So you're saying like for instance, if I'm looking at an open R Markdown file, at the top I have metadata. Instead of YAML, I just have this code. Right. Yeah.
Is that even possible?
It is possible. It's completely possible. We have thought about that a lot. I change my mind every few weeks about whether or not it's the right call. We have some, our main resistance actually comes from not the R Markdown people, but from the education people, which is interesting because I worked very closely with them to develop this package. I have a lot of tools for education with YAML here. And the feeling is that introducing a new way of doing it while also supporting the old way of doing it, which it naturally would because YAML is not going to go anywhere, is too confusing for students, too confusing for new folks when they're seeing these different syntaxes for the same thing. So
Imagine that R, there's more than one way of doing something.
yeah, that's the other side of it. Yeah, and it's actually that's one of the most common questions that I get about this package is can we just like not use YAML at all? And the answer is yes, because there's it gets very convoluted, but there is a direct relationship between lists in R and YAML. Sometimes they're a little goofy, but they do work. Yeah, so we don't have any immediate plans to do it though.
Okay.
No.
Does your add-on take an existing YAML and then allow you to edit it? Or do you
Yeah,
write
so
it?
you can use it, you can take a, well, so you're asking if like, we'll load it and it will have populate the fields and edit. Yeah, so no, that in the next release I'm going to add an edit feature. What this does do though is if you have a previous document where you want to use most of the YAML, right? And you want to use the body of the text, for instance, say you have some template that your company uses, you can load in that document and it will use those things unless you manually change them. So in that sense, yes, because of course you can just then write over your document, which will mostly have the other add-on will work.
Could you talk a little bit about how you got the internship and then your experience at RStudio?
I would love to. I would love to. I think the short answer is Twitter. If you're not on Twitter, I mean, the R community on Twitter is awesome. I mean, it's how Emil and I met originally, and it's how we both ended up here because we talked about this. And when we came here, we were like, why isn't anything happening like this in LA? And then we started the LA group, right? So it's most of the good things happening in my R sphere are happening because of Twitter. So really, I encourage you to, even if you just want to lurk, see what people are up to. It's very useful. So I think being involved with the community there, being involved with the local community, spoke to them. Sharing my work on Twitter, I think, was a big part of it. So that's the downside of being a lurker, is that people don't know who you are. If you share the work, people are very, very friendly in the community. They'll retweet it. There's a lot of aggregation sites and stuff that will get your name out there. R Weekly, R Bloggers, those kinds of things. That will get your work out there for people to see. And people do see it. They pay attention to that stuff. Our co-organizer, who has been here before, Z, if you have seen her here. She has had some very good popularity on Twitter recently, talking about how just sharing some of the cool things that she's been doing, just like in her free time working on R, just like goofy things, has gotten her job offers, as she recently defended her PhD, and she's moving up to Seattle soon to start a new job. So really, getting out there, that really helps. In terms of my experience there, so, the phrase, the grass is always green on the other side, it's like, can't be that good. It is actually that good at RStudio. It's an incredible company. The people there are great. I had such a good experience there. I worked primarily with the Shiny team, actually, and not with people working on R Markdown, which was kind of funny. But it was really great. Very high quality work being done, of course, and very good community culture there, I would say. So, unfortunately, they're a relatively lean company for what they do. So they don't have a lot of job openings in the realm of the open source aspect of things. But what I did see for people that have experience more with putting things into production, doing back-end, front-end web development stuff, those are the people that they hire right now. They've got 1 million applicants for the open source stuff. But if you know this stuff working with some of their professional products, that's really where they're growing right now. Because that, of course, is where they make most of their money. So it's not by giving us a free copy of RStudio, it's by charging Google tens of thousands of dollars to use the professional version of whatever, So that sphere is where the opportunities lie there, for sure. Really great company. I had a very good experience there. Yeah.
So just quickly, if we're going to go home today and install your package, what would you recommend to be the first way to get going with it? Would you start with an R script and then, copy paste the YAML to, or what would you recommend?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is just with the add-in, and you can actually have it, copy and paste the code for you. or just open up the file as it does by default. So that's the simple way. But as soon as you need to start doing anything somewhat custom, then my workflow is generally is writing this code and then having a separate R script that kind of generates the file. That itself is a little bit awkward. There are some circumstances where I use this code to create an R Markdown document, and then well, if I want to edit it, do I need to save that script somewhere to include in the R Markdown file? So we're still thinking about that a little bit in terms of that workflow. But yeah, I think if YAML really trips you up, the add-in's a great place to start. If you need to do more custom stuff, then working with the YAML functions directly is good.
Thanks. Thank you.
Are you continuing? Are you going to be continuing developing this, or
Yeah,
you passed it on to someone else?
No, it's still my project
Okay.
mainly. Yeah. So not that I don't have a shortage of those. Got way too many things that are not on CRAN yet that should be on CRAN and that sort of thing. But it's the pain of our developer life of where nobody. Very rarely, I mean, this was, of course, I was getting paid for this internship, which is nice. I got to focus on it full time. But most of my art development work, nobody pays me for it. Yeah, so I'm updating it pretty regularly, catching bugs. It's kind of a wide scope. So luckily, it being out in CRAN now, the community has helped me find a lot of bugs, which is nice. And so I'm trying to maintain as best I can. Definitely got some big plans for it. Still maturing as a package, I would say.
You made some comment about using YAML as programming objects when you talked about writing files. Can you sort of expand on? I didn't quite follow what you were talking about.
Yeah, that's a little bit of a vague way to put it. By programming objects, I mean objects in your R session that you can work with programmatically. So doing this with YAML is very, very doable because there's already a system in place to translate YAML into a list object in R. And the YAML package, YAML, which is what R Markdown uses, just translates it into a raw list. It's not like a specialty object of any type. It's just translated into this nested thing. And so YAMLthis wraps a lot of that and makes it a little bit easier to work with the output. But what I like about that style is that we have a whole workflow for working with lists. And so I am interested as well in thinking about R Markdown in the bigger picture of doing the same sort of thing with the code and the narrative text that you're including in your R Markdown documents, and working with them programmatically. For instance, if you need to produce a great amount of reports, all related to something. So there's already a system in place for parameterized R Markdown reports, which are very, very useful. And supported by ymlthis and the add-in for doing that type of thing. But being able to do it efficiently, I think, is an area that has a whole great deal of potential that's not been tapped yet. So then we could use PER and tools like that, tools that we already use for working with lists and that sort of thing, to work with our Markdown objects. That's very undeveloped, both in my mind and in code.
We talked a little bit about the Gray package.
The what package?
Gray package for caching reproducible.
Oh, yeah.
Can you put you on the spot, talk about that?
Sure. Sure, I'll point you to a great resource. Oh, what did I do? There we go. Let's see. So there is the Drake, R package, which has, so this works through ROpenSci, which if you haven't seen ROpenSci, it's this great community work being done, primarily on scientists, but really useful for people doing any type of data science work. And so the Drake package was primarily developed in that setting, and so it's one of their flagship products because it's so well designed, it's so useful. And it has a bookdown site, so they're using some YAML here to produce this. That has a whole bunch of detail about how to use it. So the first few chapters of this are really good, but they've done a lot of really good work with learning this package. And so there's also a package, I think it's just called Learn Drake, something like that. And that will help you learn it, which is how I learned it actually. So what Drake does, let's see if I can find it. Right. Here we go. Learn Drake, an interactive workshop on Drake. So this is really nice because it's got a, there's a project that you can go to directly and open this up. So what Drake does is you give, let me see if I can find an example of this graph here. So Drake, there we go. So Drake encourages you to organize your files in such a way that you have, your analysis is being done with R functions that you write. Right? So if I have like a bunch of stuff that I need to do to clean my data, I'm going to wrap all of that in a function called clean data, something like that. And I have this pipeline that I'm specifying where I have, I need to import my data, I need to clean it, I need to model my data, I need to then take all those things, I need to save the figure to this place, and then I also need to put all of this stuff in a report. Right? That's a pretty common workflow for a data analysis project, is they have all these different parts. So what Drake does is you give it all this information, and it will find all of the dependencies of that workflow in your file. So if you've got one file that's depending on another, right? So your import file is being used to then clean the data, right? So the cleaning the data one needs to have the import file, so it's dependent on that. It will cache all of these parts for you as well. So it figures out what the connections are between them, and then it will save these things, which you can do in R Markdown, but it's a little delicate. It breaks very easily. Drake I have found to be very robust in terms of how it handles caching these things. So if you have a big model that takes hours or days to run, and you are changing some things that actually you don't need to be rerunning your model to be doing those things, Drake knows that. And so when you rerun your report, Drake will just update the things that you need to update. And it's really cool because it figures out all that stuff for you. It's a little bit of a different way of thinking about things, but it's really, really well designed and very useful for like complicated projects. Also good, teaches you good project hygiene, so to speak. Yes, sir.
Could you just talk a little bit about what you have to do to create a new R package? How do you do it? And like, how did you write, where did you write the code, and what language did you write it in? And then what have you seen the adoption of this package? Like, how many people have installed it, or how likely is it being used?
Yeah, I haven't checked the download numbers in a little while. So I'm not sure off the top of my head. I'd like to know, I should check that soon. I haven't checked it. I only got it on Cran a few weeks ago. So usually what happens is there's a big spike at first, and then it kind of dips, and then there's an update, and there's a big spike, and then it kind of slowly builds up over time, which is what has happened to my other packages, where my first package was a package called ggdag, which I'm an epidemiologist, and so I often work in the area of causal inference. Does exposure to cigarettes cause lung cancer? Right? They have the exact question. And so this is a package for drawing some of your assumptions about those relationships in what's called a causal diagram. And it was well received at first, but the download numbers were really low, and it just kind of, this is how it always happens, it seems, unless you have like something you really knock out of the park. In terms of actually getting started with package development, so Hadley has a book called R Packages, and it's really good, and there's a new one coming, and it's going to be much better. And it's kind of a bummer that it's not really ready, because the tools have gotten so good for creating new packages. Let's see, I can create one right now. The tools, in particular with the use this package, DevTools and other related packages for development are really good too. So use this has a package called create package. Okay. I'm going to create something called test package. And it's going to just set all that up for me. And it figures out like most of the details I know. And now this is a package that I can use that doesn't do anything. Test package, and there's no functions in it right now. but it's there, right? Test package : : it finds it. The tools have gotten so easy for creating R packages, and so there are a lot of people who are now saying that you should actually use this paradigm because it's got so many tools for it, for documentation, for testing, that kind of thing, that you should use the R package paradigm for your analysis projects, for Shiny apps, for all of these other things that we don't normally think of as an R package. I'm working on writing an R package workshop right now where what we're going to do in the first hour is we're going to create one from scratch right away. Like, we're not going to go through nitty-gritty, this is how you do it. The tools have gotten so good that we can walk through it in a simple tutorial in an hour and have a working R package that is pretty robust. So R packages, the book is great, and in the second edition, it's already looking really great. Jenny Bryan has gotten involved with it, who's like an amazing educator at this stuff. So starting there, and then do you know GitHub?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that helps. You know, most of these R packages live on GitHub. Speaking of Jenny Bryan, she's got a book about using GitHub with R, which is I would say pretty essential if you're looking to start a new R package. It will save your butt, but it will also help people find it. It will help people contribute to it, which is the best thing about getting it out there. So if it's kind of like you've got an idea, or if you just have like, you've got functions that you seem to like copy and paste every time from analysis to analysis, or like you have a ggplot theme that you kind of, you have like it set up in a certain way that you're always using from analysis to analysis. This is a great time to explore creating a package for yourself to do some of those things, like make your own life easier. I have a package that has a lot of my ggplot themes, R Markdown templates, and that kind of thing. This is a really great time to explore that. Definitely check out those resources.
What's the best way to keep up with maybe in the R community, like the latest from our studio or bloggers, or kind of combination of everything?
So Twitter, and also it's overwhelming because there's so much. Twitter's my favorite. There's a woman on the Tidyverse team named Mara Averick, who is Data in Me on Twitter, and her official title is Tidyverse Advocate, and so she will often share things from the community, but also in particular from the RStudio Tidyverse team about cool new things. So she's a great person to keep tabs on. There's also, my favorite thing right now is the R Weekly blog, or email that goes out that collects blog posts and that sort of thing. It's very nice. R Bloggers is also good, but it's kind of slightly falling out of favor these days, just because it's a little bit harder to get set up.
Me?
Yeah, Data in Me. Right, Emil?
Yes.
Yeah, Data in Me.
Just A and D?
And yeah, all one word, Data in Me. That's the best way, I think. I often will find things I'm like, oh, this is such a pain. I can't believe I have to write this horrible function to do this. And then I do it, and then a month later I'm like, oh, I have the already wrote a package to do that, and it's way better. So it can be hard to keep up with everything, but that's a good place to start.
A good tip is to search from Google before doing it yourself.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Because
search.
most likely.
And it used to be a pain to search on Google for R packages because it would be like, oh, letter R, you probably misspelled something or whatever. And what was that website that you had to use?
I don't know.
Yeah, RC, yeah. So Google's gotten much better about it. They use R at Google, so I'm sure that they got so good too.
You can also use rstats as a better name of the search.
It's a website?
rstats instead of saying R, just rstats.
Oh, yeah. Which is the hashtag on Twitter, which is very useful.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. So now, any other subjects you want me to?